Hey everybody, what's up? Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be showing you how I made this super cute summer dress. It's complete with an elastic waistband instead of a zipper, so you can just slide it on over your head. Nice and simple. There's a 3/4 circle skirt, so it's nice and flowy. There's bias tape around the armholes and the neckline and the bottom for that super cute graphic outline kind of look. It's a super cute dress. I hope you enjoy this tutorial. Maybe try it out one of these days. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to start with the skirt pattern. There's just a little bit of math involved. So normally for a full circle skirt you would use 2 pi as your number, which is about 6.28, but we're doing a 3/4 circle skirt, so you only need 3/4 for that, so we're going to do 1.5 pi, which is about 4.71. So you want to take the measurement around your shoulders. For me that was 42 inches, and add a little bit for some wiggle room. I decided to go with 2 inches, which gave me a total of 44 inches. Then I took that 44 inches and divided that by 4.71, which gave me about 9.3. We're going to round that to 9.25, and that's going to be our inner circle measurement for the skirt part. Alright, so now here's a little demonstration on how to make the skirt pattern. You want to take a separate sheet of pattern paper and you want to fold it into a triangle, so you have that 45-degree angle when you fold it all the way in half, and cut that triangle out. And you want to attach it to the regular full rectangle sheet and use that entire square triangle combination to draft your pattern. Start by marking the inner circle and then measure the length of your skirt from the waist and mark that also from the waistline. That's going to be the outer circle, and you just want to mark that all the way around. And after you finish marking it all, you just want to go ahead and cut it out, and that makes the pattern for half of the skirt. So 2 of those would make the full 3/4 circle. Next up is drafting the bodice of the dress. I'm using a bodice block pattern that I already had, and so the bottom line, I took my shoulder measurement at 44 inches, divided that by 4, which was 11 inches. That's what I marked across the bottom there. And then also I'm going to alter the pattern. I'm going to lower the neckline and make the strap skinnier, and also lower the armholes. So I'm just making those changes there. On the back pattern, I'm folding back the zipper allowance that I had on there, marking that same 11 inches at the bottom instead of where the pattern stopped, and connecting it to the part under the armhole. Once again, lowering the neckline and thinning out the straps and lowering the armhole. So you want to cut out the back bodice first, and then line it up with the front bodice at the side seam under the armhole, just to make sure they're the same length, and curve it into the bottom of the front bodice before cutting that out. Alright, so now for cutting out the pieces. My fabric actually runs in one direction. If you can see, all of the fruit faces up. So what I did, I cut my fabric in half and turned the top half upside down so that all the fruit is facing in the same direction on both sides before cutting out the skirt piece. And as you can see, I don't have a lot of fabric here, so it's going to be a little bit fiddly getting all my pieces on there. I only had 3 yards. I highly suggest you get more fabric than that if you're going to try this out, just so you don't end up running into the same issues I did. But I just placed the skirt on using as little fabric as possible, pinned it down, and cut around it. So now for cutting out the bodice pieces, I took that large remaining piece of fabric that I had, and I kind of just positioned the 2 pieces on. It took a minute to figure out how I should lay them on there, and the other thing I had to do, because I'm cutting out my bodice in 2 separate pieces, I'm going to sew it up the middle. So I ended up having to add some seam allowance on that center fold, what would have been the center fold. I had to put some seam allowance right there just so I don't make the bodice too small, so I'm marking that now, and then I'm going to go ahead and finish cutting them out. After that, I grabbed some of the scrap pieces and I just drafted out my waistband pieces. I'm just doing 2 inches since I'm using an inch wide elastic, and I just cut out 2 pieces. I didn't really measure how long they should be. All I knew they had to be about 22 inches or more so that they would both fit on 1/2 of the skirt. So now I'm just tracing out the pockets. I'm just tracing around my hand into a general pocket shape. And if you notice, I did make my pocket opening a little bit small. You want to not draft your pocket opening super close to your wrist like I did. You want to give yourself a little more space. And then you just go ahead and cut it out through 4 layers of fabric. So next I'm cutting out 2 bodice pieces out of the lining. I'm doing those on fold since I have enough fabric just to cover up that center seam I'm gonna have. And I didn't get a video of this, but I also cut out a couple of waistband pieces from the lining as well. So once you finish cutting out your pieces, you should have the bodice and the lining, the back bodice and the lining, 4 pocket pieces, the waistband, and the skirt pieces. So now I'm going to sew the 2 sides of the bodices together along that center line. I'm also going to attach the lining. I'm attaching the lining directly to the back of the fabric because I only left seam allowance for the bias tape. So I'm going to baste it directly to the back side of the fabric, but only along the armholes and neckline. So next I'm going to attach the pockets to the skirt pieces. I just marked 3 inches down from the top of the skirt, and I'm going to put the pockets there. As you can see, I did cut one of my pockets out backwards, but no one's going to see a pocket anyway, it's fine. But I'm just going to pin that and sew it on and top stitch it down. So next up is attaching the waistband to the bodice. I'm pinning the lining waistband onto the lining side of the fabric, and then after that I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to attach the main waistband onto the right side of the fabric, right sides together, so it's going to go on upside down, making sure everything is lined up. And I'm going to sew this with a 5/8 inch seam allowance just to make sure I cover up all the selvage. So next we're attaching the skirt to the waistband. I'm just going to trim off the extra right now. Now when I attach the skirt on, I'm just going to pin it to the whole thing, make sure everything is lined up straight. And my lining fabric is stretchy. I used a regular jersey knit, so if you are using a stretchy fabric, just make sure that you're not warping it out of shape while you pin it. Alright, so next we're going to attach the 2 halves together. So here I'm just lining everything up. You want to go ahead and pin it at the shoulder seams and also along only one side, and we're going to sew it down. Alright, pause. If you're following this tutorial, then I'm going to need you to not do what I am doing here. You don't want to sew through both layers of the waistband because you need the waistband to be open all the way through. So fold the lining waistband back and only sew up the side along the outer fabric because it'll save you a lot of heartache later. Anyway, you want to go ahead and keep pinning all the way down and then pin around the pocket and just sew the shoulder seams and also down the entire side seam. Alright, so this is what I was talking about. I didn't realize what I had done until after I had sewed the seam up. You want the waistband to be open all the way through, but by sewing through both the outer and the lining fabric, you close off the whole waistband, so it's not a tube anymore. So what I ended up having to do was seam rip the waistband and sew it back together, but only through the outer fabric, leaving the lining fabric open so that I could still get through it. So once that whole situation was rectified, I got my elastic, I put a safety pin through one end, and I started inserting it into the fabric and just slowly pulling it through, making sure it's not twisting along the way. Once I reached the center where I could pull it out right there, I went ahead and pinned the back end, and I continued down the rest of the elastic all the way down through to the other end. So once you have the elastic all the way through, I pinned the other end as well, and I went ahead and lined up the 2 sides and sewed down that side, making sure to catch the elastic in the stitch so that it's all sealed in. I also went ahead and zigzag stitched over the raw edges on the seams just so that they don't fray as much, or you can use a serger if you have one. So now I'm taking some double fold bias tape, I'm going to unfold it and I'm going to line it up with the neckline right up at the edge, and I'm just going to pin it all the way around, and I'm going to do that for the neckline and the two armholes, and I'm going to leave just about a ½ an inch or so at the beginning and end, just extra. So now I'm going to sew the bias tape down. I'm just going to sew it down that crease all the way around the armholes and the neckline, and that little extra that I left hanging over, I'm just going to sew those two ends together as well. Next, I'm going to go through and unpick all of those basting stitches that I used to hold together the lining and main fabrics. It's a very long and tedious process, so I only really picked out the stitches that were visible. So now I'm going to finish up the bias tape. I'm going to fold that outer side in towards the middle, and then I'm going to fold it up at the seam and fold it down that halfway point around to the back, which is going to seal in all of those raw edges. I really hope that made sense, and I hope you can kind of see what I'm doing, but I'm basically just going to fold it over and around, covering up all of the raw edges and pinning it down all the way around the armholes and the neckline. Now I'm going to sew down the bias tape one last time. To try and keep my lines as straight as possible, I tried my best to keep the bias tape edge lined up with the edge of my presser foot, so I have a straight line to follow. For the bottom edge of the skirt, I'm going to use single fold bias tape, which is very similar to double fold bias tape, except it's not folded in half. Like you see, the double fold bias tape is the fabric is folded towards the middle and then folded in half. Single fold bias tape is only folded towards the middle. But we're essentially going to be turning this into double fold bias tape because we're going to be folding it in half. So I'm just going to fold it in half all the way down and iron it out so that the crease stays in place. So I'm going to do my best to explain what I'm doing here to attach the bias tape to the bottom of the skirt. Basically, I'm just sandwiching the bias tape around the bottom raw edge, and I'm holding it and folding it over, and I'm only sewing about an inch or two at a time just to make sure that nothing goes out of place and that I catch both the bias tape and the raw edge of the fabric in the same go. And I'm just going to do that all the way down, taking it as slow as I need it. So once you make it to the end, you want to trim off that extra thread there, just so they won't be hanging out, and you want to cut the remaining bias tape with a little bit extra so you can fold the raw edges under. I also trimmed the bottom layer of the bias tape at a diagonal so that the raw edges wouldn't show, and it's a little bit fiddly, but you basically just want to fold back the extra so that the raw edges are hidden, and once you have it in place, you just want to sew over it and make sure to backstitch at the end. And once that's done, you just want to clean up any extra loose threads hanging off, and you're finished. And here it is, the final dress. I really do like how it came out, even though I had a few problems in the whole making of process. It came out really nicely. It's super comfortable, it's super fun, it's super flowy. I can spin in it and it looks amazing, you know, all that kind of stuff that's always really fun. If you like it too, be sure to leave a thumbs up down below, maybe subscribe for more content. And well, yeah, that's it for this video, so I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye!